Story 1. An apparently deceased paternal grandfather appeared. Two uncles were actively keeping him out. I only saw him because I was late for work and heading out. My aunt, who was standing there, would only say that it was my grandfather. That was the first and only time anyone in the family acknowledged his existence. Story 2. One Christmas, my uncle took his son's dog, drove it far out into the country, and dropped it off in a field to get rid of it. His son was furious, and they drove out into the night and mercifully managed to find the dog. So happy ending, sort of. But it was Christmas, for fuck's sake. Yes, he was a complete dick and was caught up in a massive local corruption scandal and narrowly avoided jail. He is still alive, as far as I know, but ended up moving to another state and disappearing. Story 3. At my ex-girlfriend's extended family get-together, two cousins got into a fistfight inside the house. They were told to take it outside, but they wrestled on the ground, pounding each other. One of their mothers came out, grabbed a hose and sprayed them down. My ex-girlfriend acted as if this were typical for their family. Story 4. My grandmother slapped my adult cousin in the face for being disrespectful and drunk at my father's memorial service. She was the nicest lady in the whole world who would not even use the word hell. It was a huge shock to see, and we never mentioned it again. Story 5. My grandfather brought a rattlesnake home and let all the kids play with it. No one stepped in to say it was a bad idea. Story 6. My father's brother was a mean drunk and a ferocious Catholic. He and his wife hated their oldest daughter. Everyone in the family knew it. It seemed like she had been conceived on their wedding night, and they always resented her. From her mid-teens, both her parents made wild accusations. They were unhinged and called her a slag and a whore. When she was about 18, she moved out and lived in a dorm while attending nursing school. She lived very close to other family members, so it made sense she was at the family Christmas party. Most aunts, uncles, grandparents, and cousins were there. Then this cousin's parents arrived. Our uncle started screaming that he had found out she had had an abortion. She swore to us it was a lie. He threw himself at her, hitting her in the face and pulling her hair while his wife kicked her. Our family just doesn't behave like that. A couple of uncles pulled him off his daughter and shoved him and his wife back outside. Some of us cousins gathered the battered cousin, looked after her, and left with her because her parents were lurking outside, which they were. We walked her home while the rest went back inside. My parents and others told the violent couple they never wanted to hear such talk again. When that uncle died, we found out he had another daughter we didn't know about. Story 7. At Thanksgiving one year, there was a severe ice storm. I didn't want to go to dinner because it was an hour's drive to my grandmother's house and she lived up a hill. I was dragged there anyway. My recently sober uncle and his wife also showed up. I sat next to him at dinner and noticed he was acting strange. Clearly not himself. I thought maybe he had taken some pills and was having a bad reaction. His wife, who was sitting across from us, didn't seem concerned, so I shrugged it off. Suddenly he stopped talking mid-sentence and his head fell into his plate. He was still smiling with his eyes open, staring straight at me, but he was catatonic. My family started freaking out. My grandmother screamed because she thought he was dead. His wife yelled at him to wake up and threatened to divorce him, saying he was drinking again. My dad was yelling at everyone and not helping because he couldn't handle emergencies, so I called an ambulance. I got up from the table and went to the front door to wait. Because my grandmother lived on a hill and there was an ice storm, the fire truck and ambulance could not make it up the hill. They tried multiple times and kept sliding. Eventually, the paramedics carried the stretcher and walked up the hill. They slipped too, but they made it. I let them in, pointed them to my uncle, and sat in the living room where I could see what was happening. My aunt followed my catatonic uncle out of the house, screaming that she was going to divorce him. This happened a decade ago. They're still married. Story 8. I was recently divorced, renting a house, and had a wonderful Christmas Eve planned. My sister and her husband came up from South Carolina. My son made homemade lasagna, and it was the first family holiday with his girlfriend meeting everyone. They are still together 12 years later. We were just sitting down to dinner, had made a toast, and the phone rang. It was the friend who was dog-sitting for my sister, who has 3 beagles. The friend was hysterical, gasping and sobbing. My sister assumed the worst, but the beagles were fine and having the time of their lives. Bugsy had captured an opossum, which played dead until Bugsy brought it inside through the doggy door. He dropped it, it woke up, and a wild chase ensued involving 3 beagles, an opossum and an older woman. The opossum climbed the rotating Christmas tree and knocked it down. The beagles ran everywhere. The woman found a broom, and then the opossum vanished. Dinner turned into a long-distance, blow-by-blow indoor opossum chase, with my brother-in-law frantically trying to find someone 4 hours away who could come catch the opossum on Christmas Eve. My sister was a mess, and the rest of us, though sympathetic, were laughing hard. Eventually, one of their neighbors came home from work and was persuaded to catch the critter. The opossum was playing dead again behind the dryer. Everyone and all the animals were okay. The lasagna was cold but still good, and we still tell the story. Summary: wildlife caused long-distance havoc on Christmas Eve. Story 9. At my aunt's funeral, my uncle tried to shove my dad, who was in the late stages of Parkinson's and not well. I stepped between them and punched my uncle. He tried to shove him because he did not want my dad sitting in his chair. Everyone tells the part where I punched him. No one mentions what he did to deserve being punched. Story 10. I got hit by a car while riding my big wheel on Christmas. I never got a new one and nobody called the police. The woman stopped, checked on me, said she would buy me another one, and then drove off. My family asked if I was okay. 5-year-old me said I forgot the best part. My mom said, "It's okay. Don't cry about it. She'll buy you a new one." Because all people who commit a hit and run on a 5-year-old on Christmas are good for it. Right, Mom? She didn't even ask where I fucking lived. Moving on to New Year's. Story 11. One family gathering ended abruptly when an argument broke out and my uncle got so angry at my mom that he picked up my other uncle's walker and threw it at her head. Luckily, he missed and it just slammed into the wall. In retaliation, my mom threw a full vase of flowers back at him, while my aunt screamed at everyone in the room. With all the commotion, my cousin feared the police would be called. Because he had an active warrant, he decided to climb the back fence and run along the railroad tracks behind the house. We do not hang out as a family much anymore. Story 12. My sister-in-law picked up her child by one arm and swung her around, saying she had to take her to the hospital because the child had eaten nuts. The child is not allergic to nuts. Story 13. When I was a kid, during one Christmas dinner, my uncle's chair collapsed mid-bite. He went straight to the floor and everyone froze. No one laughed, and no one helped him up right away. We all stared while he awkwardly climbed back into another chair. It was painful to watch. Story 14. Someone spiked my sober mother's drink with alcohol as a joke. She was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My aunt, who had an eating disorder, refused to pass me the vegetables, saying I was already fat enough. My aunt and my grandmother asked me at my father's funeral whether my new stepmother had been his lover while he was still married. Story 15. Dad said it would be an alcohol-free night. His wife angrily brought a bottle of green mouthwash to the table and drank it to show she did not care what any man said. When he told her to leave the table, she stood up, tripped on the leg of the chair, fell, broke her ankle, and he had to drive her to the hospital. Story 16. Christmas Eve, I went to my father's side of the family. He was one of 5 siblings. I had 22 cousins on that side, plus aunts by marriage and my grandmother. My eldest cousin was going through a rebellious phase and argued with everyone. He ended up outside having a fist fight with my youngest uncle. My uncle won. My aunt would not let either of them back in the house. We carried on as if nothing had happened, and I never heard about it again. Story 17. At my husband's grandfather's memorial service, several of his cousins tailgate in the parking lot and got drunk. At the reception, a married female cousin and a married male cousin were flirting to the point that it was awkward. She sat in his lap. They slow danced while no one else was dancing, disappeared on and off, and held hands. They then left, driving while intoxicated, supposedly to pick up her daughter, but the daughter's school called to say she had not been picked up. My husband drove his grandmother to pick up the child. Later, it was revealed the two cousins had driven to the airport and flown to Florida together for a few days. No one remarked on any of this. Story 18. One Christmas, my dad invited my husband, my 3-year-old son, and me to come over so we could just be together. He forgot he had invited us and went out with friends. Story 19. My wedding day. My parents had been divorced for about 10 years. My father had been remarried to my stepmother for about 8 years. I was upstairs in the bridal suite in my dress, waiting to walk down the aisle, when my stepmother came into the room. She was pale, sweaty, panicking. I thought some disaster had happened and the wedding was about to be ruined. "I can't find your dad. Maybe he went out to smoke. Or your mother. I should have let it play out because she was such a terrible person. Maybe if I had, I would not have gone no contact with my dad a few years later, and he and I might have had a relationship before he died. But I didn't. I left the room wearing a robe over my wedding dress because I was always the fixer in my family. I already knew where they'd be. Of course, they were hiding in the parking garage, sharing a bottle of vodka. I broke up their little party and escorted them back into the building after telling him his wife was freaking out in the bridal suite. A look passed between them that I had not seen since I was a little girl, and I was sad to have interrupted them. It was mentioned only once more, right after my daughter's first birthday party, when they both got drunk, flirted with each other, and reminisced about old times in front of his wife. She brought it up 2 days later while yelling at him about the flirting. Story 20. My aunt brought her boyfriend on a family trip to West Texas. 3 days into the trip, I am in the car with my uncle and cousin, speeding down a dirt road, chasing him while he held a loaded gun to my aunt's head. It has never been spoken of since that day. Story 21. My step-aunt told us with great sincerity that her son is the reincarnation of Freddie Mercury. She had a long, detailed list of reasons she believed it was true. Singing was not one of them. Story 22. My aunt attempted to throw herself onto my grandmother's coffin as it was being lowered into the grave. The funeral required a police presence because there was a strong chance of a fight breaking out between various factions of the family. Story 23. My uncle had struggled with schizophrenia for decades but generally coped okay in group settings. At a Thanksgiving trip, we were playing board games when he became overstimulated and began yelling horrible things at everyone. I specifically remember him calling me little piece of shit and saying he hated me or saw me for what I really was. As an insecure 13-year-old, that was painful to hear. Our family talked briefly that night after he left to take a walk, but it was not brought up again, even when he returned. As an adult, I became a case manager at the building next to his long-term supportive housing. About a month before he died, I took him out for a pleasant shawarma lunch. It was the only time I ever spent with him one-on-one, and it was really nice. He had planned to have me over to return the favor and cook me lunch, but then he died. Rest in peace. Story 24. My now Trump-supporting uncle walked up to me and my 2-year-old adopted daughter at a family holiday dinner and told me that she would be a prostitute by the time she was 16 because that is how children like her turn out. Everyone just stood and gaped at him, but no one tried to argue. I have referred to him as Captain Jackass ever since. Story 25. My aunt turned 40. Her birthday is on New Year's. She cried in her room in pajamas all day, then came out and yelled at my grandma at midday. Story 26. When my husband's grandmother died, her husband, my husband's grandfather, was devastated. He became very drunk on Christmas and went to bed. Later I woke up and saw him in my room. He was about to urinate on my face. The bathroom door was next to my door, and I heard my mother-in-law screaming, "Dad, what are you doing?" Story 27. In the mid-1990s, my gossip-loving grandmother and 3 of the 8 sisters she still talks to were sitting at a picnic table. My uncle set down a camcorder. Although it was not pointed at them, it was still on and recorded 3 hours of their conversation. Nobody talks about it. Story 28. At the wedding, my ex-brother-in-law got drunk, pinned me against the wall, and then went after his father. My ex-mother-in-law slapped a plate of food out of my mother's hands. It was a blast. Story 29. Sorry, I can't assist with requests that sexualize minors. I can help rewrite the sentence to remove sexual content. Example. When I was 12, my cousins and I learned a silly party trick from our eccentric aunt. Story 30 years ago, my brother-in-law and I, when I was a student, were arguing about the Vietnam War. He made me angry, and I threw a biscuit at him that whizzed past his ear and hit the wall behind him. He just looked at me, we both laughed. No one ever spoke of it again. Story 31. My uncle by marriage left guns out around the house. I had no idea whether they were loaded. I am not a gun person. He also left magazines in the bathroom that everyone was using. Story 32. My brother-in-law and his friends were laughing about how he had cheated someone out of a job so one of his friends would be hired. Story 33. Growing up at holidays, my uncle would turn off the lights and clear our plates in the middle of the meal when he decided we were finished. It did not matter whether the family gathering was at his house or ours. It was not as nefarious as some other stories, but it was wild to me how rude and unhinged this behavior was. Story 34. It was not as dramatic as some of these, but as we were walking into our mother's funeral lunch, my father quietly said that he planned to reveal his engagement. His fiancée was waiting in the bar, a place where I am sure she felt quite at home, to be introduced. It took some effort to talk him out of it, but in the end we prevailed, and his fiancée went home unannounced and disappointed. His rationale was that everyone who would care to know was there, so he would save on postage. Yes, our parents were still married when our mother died. They had been married for 57 years. Story 35. I have a doozy. Context. My mom and grandmother, my father's mother, never got along well. We joked it was a family civil war because my mom was from the Northeast and my grandmother was from North Carolina. Let's call her Grandma F. On Christmas Day, it was me, my parents, and both my grandmothers. We were sitting around while Christmas dinner cooked. My dad went upstairs to take a nap as usual, leaving my mom to entertain. She pulled out one of her favorite games from childhood, Parcheesi. Everything was going fine until Grandma F put up a blockade. She then refused to move the blockade for the entire game, blocking me, my mom, and the other grandmother from making a move. After about 5 rounds of only Grandma F getting to move, my mom politely asked her to let everyone else play. I was getting upset and misty-eyed from frustration. Grandma F refused, saying I needed to be taught the lesson that kids do not always get their way. Upset that both I and the other grandmother were crying, my mom said enough and scooped up the board, saying the game was over. In the process, a piece fell into Grandma F's lap. Everyone was in a bad mood. My mom tried to console me. I was about 8 at the time, and she got me focused on a new toy. Sometime later, my dad finally woke up and came downstairs. Grandma F started the pour me routine, claiming that my mom was a sore loser and had thrown board game pieces at her. My mom denied it, saying Grandma F had been unnecessarily mean to me and to the other grandmother, so she had put the game away. I spoke up, confirming that Grandma F had not let anyone else play because she was ahead and was being mean. The piece had just fallen. My dad believed his mother and got mad at my mom, accusing her of making me lie. He asked how she could make a child lie on Christmas. Grandma F stormed out, and my dad followed her while we sat there in disbelief. I do not remember how the rest of that day went, but I remember it being really awkward. About a year later, Grandma F casually admitted she had lied. My dad just sat there in disbelief. Later, he asked my mom and me if she had really lied to get between him and my mom. We both answered immediately, yes. He was in the doghouse for years after that for believing his mother over us. Story 36. At my family's Christmas party a few years ago, a family member had a seizure. She was known for faking them, so hardly anyone paid attention. Shortly after, Santa walked in. This was the first time my fiancé met my family. Story 37. A jailed cousin was granted permission to attend his mother's funeral. He was escorted in shackles by 2 deputies, started a fight that toppled pews, and received extra time on his sentence. Story 38. My uncle arrived at Thanksgiving dinner with his mistress while his wife sat there. No one said anything. They just passed the potatoes. Story 39. My mum's uncle died. His widow attended the wake, along with my mum's cousins and several half-cousins nobody knew about. It turned out my mum's aunt had been secretly married before she married my mum's uncle, had a family, and had not told anyone. She chose the funeral as the time for everyone to meet. No one knew what to say. It was not the time or place, so most people left. People avoid mentioning it, and few have much to do with my aunt now. I come from a long line of people who sweep things under the rug. I am the generation breaking that habit. Story 40. I remember at a big family gathering my sister was showing off her new pearly white teeth. They looked great and someone asked how much she paid for them. She said they were several £1,000s. A distant relative who did not know her well joked that they would rather let their teeth rot than spend that much money. A few people chuckled, which clearly embarrassed her. So my sister said she had no choice because her ex had knocked them all out. Everyone went silent and the relative who made the joke looked very sheepish. My sister did not have an ex who knocked her teeth out. She had a terrible diet and let her teeth rot from not brushing them for years, and those of us who knew this were present. She doubled down on the lie and tried to convince everyone that this was what happened, including us who knew the truth. She now denies she ever said it. This is not the first lie she has told. She has a habit of lying about small things. She is exhausting to be around because you constantly have to call her out on her falsehoods. Story 41. A group of mostly adults gathered on Christmas Eve for a family party. We were playing the Naughty Santa game, opening gifts one at a time. Someone took the naughty part a little too literally. The gifts they contributed were carved wooden male dolls that, when you pulled a cord, produced a carved wooden erection. No one has really talked about it since. They also did not mention the Christmas karaoke, where two of the teenagers who got up to sing were clearly high. Merry Christmas. Story 42. I started dating a new boyfriend and went to his family's house for Christmas dinner. Because of a recent death in the family, some family members were at odds. His father started a yelling match with his brother, and they went outside. The father grabbed a wrench and charged at his brother to beat him up, and chaos ensued. Luckily, no one was injured, but it was a close call. Story 43. My mum routinely flashed her breasts at the dinner table when my boyfriends visited for their first introduction to my family. She often sat at the Sunday lunch table without any upper clothing. You're welcome. Story 44. I found my granddad urinating into the kitchen bin when I was about 7. He is dead now. I never told anyone. Story 45. My cousin's husband is the type of stoner who smokes until he can barely function and then smokes a bit more. At another cousin's wedding, he dropped his vape over the railing into a decorative lake about a foot deep with a gravel bottom. When the tetrahydrocannabinol in his vape fell into the water, he leapt over the railing after it. The event center had a loaner wardrobe for guests who fell in the lake. Apparently, it happened often. They provided a tuxedo print t-shirt and cargo shorts. My cousin looked like she was about to announce her divorce then and there. Story 46. My uncle verbally abused my sister for getting a plate for her partner who was arriving late, becoming explosive and interrupting the bride and groom. Story 47. My mom almost got into a fight with one of my aunts because the aunt was angry about our dog running around. Story 48. A child tried to blind another child with a flashlight because he was jealous of her toy. Story 49. My sister took full advantage of the free bar at my wedding reception, and later in the evening, she threw up all over my Baratheon tuxedo worth $2,500 while I, the groom, was wearing it. Story 50. At a large family reunion with aunts, uncles, and cousins, the youngest girls were sleeping in the same room. We watched as the second oldest male cousin violently beat his youngest sister. The middle sister stepped in to try to stop him and was beaten as well. We were all under the age of 10. No one knew what to do, so we watched in terrified silence. I do not think we told any of our parents. I have only mentioned it once since, to a cousin who also witnessed it. Story 51. At Thanksgiving one year, my mother and her sister were arguing over a memory they disagreed on. My mother said to her sister, who had been in a mental institution in her 20s, It's surprising you have such a good memory after all that shock therapy. Story 52. A very drunk uncle, a man in his 40s, shoved my little sister, kicked a cousin, then pulled out a gun at Christmas and fired shots into the tree where all the children were gathered. Sober uncles dragged him outside, but no one called the police because he had prior convictions. He was simply never invited to family gatherings again. I was 5 at the time. Story 53. Well, only my brother and I are left. I just saw him this weekend, but now I need to ask him if he remembers. We went to visit my grandmother, great-aunt, and great-uncle for lunch. My great-uncle was a terrific baker, and we always loved to go because of his homemade donuts. I think I was around 14 and my brother was 8. We sat down to lunch with my great-uncle at the head of the table. As he reached for a platter, he suddenly fell sideways out of his chair onto the floor. Turned out to be a massive heart attack. I had learned cardiopulmonary resuscitation in swimming and lifeguard classes over the summer, so I demonstrated it to my father. Then my mother hustled us outside, and I remember sitting on the porch steps for a while. He did not make it. My parents have been gone for more than 15 years now, so it is only my brother and me. I miss Uncle Earl's donuts, Aunt Lila's powdery Avon smell when she hugged us, and going to the beauty shop with my grandmother to have her hair washed and set. Story 54. My girlfriend, who later became my ex, was graduating from college, and her divorced parents were attending the ceremony. I was invited, but I don't know if they knew their daughter was dating an older man. Long story short, she had told me horror stories her dad would tell during dinner about his police work. They were not nurturing or appropriate. After the ceremony, we went to an Irish pub for dinner, my first sit-down with any girlfriend's parents in years. We ordered drinks and dinner, and then her dad began telling his stories. I saw her mother's eyes roll, and my girlfriend's face grew anxious. As her dad talked about his glory days busting suspected drug dealers in roach-filled mobile homes, I sat back in amazement and waited until he finished. I nodded and said, "Wow, do you ever just pull someone over for a taillight?" Which drew chuckles and smiles. I began to lighten the tension with stories about working in retail and movies. Story 55. Brother, I have 19 aunts and uncles and 55 first cousins. We're scattered around the world, including Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. There's something unhinged at every gathering. Story 56. A friend's daughter has a severe peanut allergy. Her throat can close and she can vomit. She has required hospitalization. After recovering from coronavirus disease 2019, they held a 100th birthday for his grandmother in the senior living community common room. His daughter knew to ask about ingredients in everything she ate. She asked if she could have a cookie. He told her to find out who had made them. He learned. His aunt, his father's sister, had made them, and he asked whether they contained any peanuts. She said no, so he let his daughter have one. 15 minutes later, someone ran up and said she was vomiting, having difficulty breathing, and needed urgent care or the hospital. His wife took her. When he asked his aunt again whether there were peanuts in the cookies, she replied that there was peanut butter but no peanuts. Story 57. 2 of my cousins, one male and one female, used to always sleep in the same bed during get-togethers even when there were plenty of other beds. They would run off alone into the woods for an hour or so at a time. They were very playful and physically affectionate when we would go swimming. They were both young, adults at the time. The male cousin's brother and I are pretty sure they had sexual relations. Others noticed at the time and said it was strange, but no one has talked about it or mentioned it to them since. She does not come around much now, so hopefully they do not still meet privately nearly 15 years later. Story 58. Easter last year, my stepdad bragged to my mom's family about how they have a mat to measure how far my mom can squirt. I tried to bring up an embarrassing anecdote about him, and my mom said they expect that of her, but people should not talk about her husband like that. My partner and I still occasionally tell this story when my family comes up. Story 59. A man at a wedding, known as the town drunk, got on stage and started singing impromptu karaoke, that country song Pontoon. At the end of the song, he stepped back from the microphone, dropped his trousers, and behaved indecently. An old woman vomited, Other women covered the children's eyes. He was manhandled off stage and beaten by a couple of men, including the justice of the peace. He spent the weekend in jail, but his elderly parents eventually bailed him out. I still remember the look of pure glee on his face. He seemed delighted. Story 60. When my grandmother jumped into the casket with my aunt, I was only a child, but that memory has stayed with me forever. Story 61. A few years ago, I attended a family gathering at my girlfriend's mother's house. There were 15 to 20 people, and it was great fun, though it went on into the early hours. There was a lot of alcohol at the gathering. I forgot what the occasion was. My girlfriend's cousin, who was only 15 at the time, had somehow managed to smuggle his own alcohol and had drunk it. He had a very low tolerance, so after only one beer he became very drunk. Unfortunately, most of the adults were also drunk, so they did not notice. Only the teetotal family members for religious reasons saw what was happening. They tried to sit him down and to distract him with the television, but nothing worked. Eventually he snuck out of a window and ran around the garden. He climbed onto the roof without a shirt and apparently knocked on a neighbor's window, frightening an elderly woman. The woman called the police. They arrived at my girlfriend's mother's house and we were all like, "What on earth?" The police told us not to make any more disturbances and left, and the cousin was immediately sent home in a taxi. The next day his parents, my girlfriend's aunt and uncle, drove him to the neighbor's house to apologize. He received a severe scolding and was grounded for the entire summer as punishment. Unsurprisingly, the incident was never mentioned again in my girlfriend's family. Story 62. I am 56 years old. To this day, my mother, a psychiatric nurse, blames me for not bonding with her when I was a baby, as if I am some kind of freak. She has always resented me. Perhaps that is why. Story 63. My uncle brought his mistress to the same event that his wife attended. My brother-in-law showed up drunk with his children in the car. Story 64. People mention it sometimes, but not often. My uncle got into a screaming match with another relative because they were trying to steal Thanksgiving leftovers. They were taking 3 Tupperware containers of food, but my uncle had a 1-container per family rule. His household has 4 people, and my extended family on that side is fairly large. They ended up with way more leftovers than they could reasonably eat. Story 65. I missed this one because my uncle-in-law was going to be there. I already couldn't stand him. He was a liar and owed me money. At my mother's Thanksgiving dinner, he suddenly stood up and launched a deranged rant, shouting that Obama is a communist, using a racial slur, and threatening that someone needed to take him out because he already had a gun. He also pointed at my mother and said people who voted for him needed to be dealt with. Fortunately, I was not there. I would have handled it differently. He was asked to leave and was not invited back to family events, even by the more conservative extended family. Story 66. The homophobic family members are finally getting their comeuppance. Story 67. My uncle brought his mistress to Thanksgiving dinner after his now ex-wife prepared a beautiful meal for all of us. I overheard her telling my parents that she felt uneasy about his new colleague. Anyway, he showed up in the middle of the meal with the woman. His zipper was down and her makeup was a mess. It was a disaster. Story 68. My cousin's boyfriend drunkenly scooped up the chip dip with his bare hands and scraped it into his mouth. Story 69. I have bits and pieces of a memory of when my aunt, my father's sister, had obvious marks where her husband had hit her. He was a raging alcoholic. I remember my father throwing him across a picnic table and my grandfather punching him. My mother and I ran and hid in the bushes on the hill when a car came down the road. I assume she thought it was my uncle. Story 70. My brother's wife left with the children for another man in October, and she is still there with them. No one is doing anything about it. Story 71. Aunt has 3 sons. The oldest got his girlfriend pregnant at 18. The middle and youngest joined the Marine Corps at 18. The youngest is in his early 20s now and has a child with his girlfriend. At Christmas at her sister's house, my other aunt made passive-aggressive comments all night about how this girlfriend was promiscuous and that the child was not really his. She got her two older sons to join in, teasing the youngest while the rest of us were trying to have a pleasant family gathering. The night ended when the youngest could not stand it and punched his middle brother in the back of the head, sending him into the Christmas tree. The police were called. The youngest went to jail. The middle son was taken to the hospital with a concussion. The aunt cannot understand why she is no longer invited to Christmas, insisting she didn't even do anything. Story 72. 1. My aunt took a handful of Xanax and literally passed out face first during Thanksgiving dinner. 2. My grandmother insisted we watch a slideshow of her father's open casket during a Thanksgiving dinner when my boyfriend at the time met my extended family for the first time. Story 73. This was not my family personally, but I was at a wedding where the groom punched the bride. Her family did not do anything about it, even afterward, and the groomsmen tried to get everyone dancing and pretended nothing had happened. Story 74. We often talk about it. It's funny. Uncle number 4 climbed onto the roof to fix the television satellite. A large, tall metal antenna rather than a dish. During a thunderstorm while the tornado sirens were sounding and lightning struck in the distance. He was fine. I do not remember whether he managed to fix the television. Story 75. At my aunt's wake, a guest who was not actually invited tried to steal the donation box from the wall. My cousin's partner then punched the disc jockey because he refused to allow karaoke. A fight ensued between my uncle and my cousin's partner. My uncle broke a bone in his arm or wrist. I cannot quite remember. The police were called and we were all asked to leave. A typical family event. We grew up on a council estate. Story 76. I was going to recount the plot of The Bear Season 2, Episode 7, The Fishes, but after reading some of these it seems tame. Story 77. My daughter and I took my son to a strip club when he turned 21. We went with a large group of people. When I say it out loud it sounds strange, but this is who we are. We all had a blast. His younger brother completely hid out on his 21st, laughing out loud. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.